Hi, I'm Hamish Black, and welcome to Writing on Games. First off, a disclaimer, I'm not trying to attack anyone here. If I mention names, I'm not angrily singling anyone out. They're perhaps just the most relevant to or prevalent in this particular discussion. I'm going to criticise some of Jim Sterling's ideas, for example, but he's certainly not guilty of everything I talk about here. I also think that dude seems cool and I could see him being very fun to hang out with, so on the off chance you're watching this, Jim, I assure you it isn't personal. Cool? Cool. So yeah, Steam has been kind of broken for a while now. As many before me have pointed out, the mere presence of a game on Steam used to be a marker of quality. In the past, it led me to trawl the platform constantly to see what new games had been released. Cut to a few years later, a tradition of hyper-reduced sales prices leading to a library full of games I will likely never play, and an opening of the floodgates to any schmuck with an executable, and well, yeah, not so interested in that anymore. For some people, however, it's far more than just a lack of interest. People are legitimately angry about the state of the platform, with some people more or less dedicating their careers to trying to get it fixed. Notable problems include the ways in which Valve has let curation slip, that they've foisted responsibility for managing it onto consumers and algorithms. This leads to games that used to get visibility from their presence on Steam now being completely buried. There's also systems like Greenlight, which have been gamed by rogue developers to get their games on the service illegitimately, as well as the ever-irritating asset flip, where store-bought assets and Unity tutorials are uploaded to the platform without any creative input to try and make a quick buck. Each has become more prevalent over the years, as well as gradually lowering Steam in the eyes of its consumer base. As a result, a lot of things have been shouted very loudly again and again that Steam needs to stop letting bad games onto their service and start giving us good games, damn it. And at least on the surface anyway, it seems that the years of shouting might have paid off. Steam has already announced that they're ditching Greenlight in favour of Direct, a system which introduces a paywall in an attempt to stop devs abusing the platform. In a somewhat more surprising move, however, Valve recently flew consumer advocate YouTubers Jim Sterling and John Bain, otherwise known as TotalBiscuit, over to their offices to consult on plans to improve the service. The result? Well, unfortunately, a lot of it boils down to a more concentrated focus on what they've already been doing, doubling down on algorithms and crowdsourcing curation. Want to do some free PR work for these devs? You can call yourself an explorer if you want, buddy. And I guess sating the weird desire of your TotalBiscuits to have everything perfectly categorized. A good minute or so of TB's video is spent lamenting the ever so urgent problem of Steam, that they didn't recognise his specific distinction between the terms roguelike and roguelite. This platform is really going places. As you can probably tell, I don't think any of this is very convincing. In fact, I don't get the feeling Jim and John are particularly convinced themselves. Maybe of the fact that Valve is aware of its image problem? Who knows? It doesn't mean that they're going to enact any kind of meaningful fixes, however. Even flying the guys out there is more of a symbolic gesture than anything else. More importantly, I don't think it's possible for anything to come out of those meetings to actually solve the issue. That's because the issue itself is far bigger than just fixing Steam's front page. And that's just it. These people, these consumer advocates, were brought out to fix Valve's image problem. A problem Valve caused for themselves through their desire to control as much of the PC market as possible, with little regard for how they were actually going to manage that eventuality. The problem is that we're viewing this in terms as black and white, as once we fix Steam, we fix the PC gaming landscape. It ignores the more uncomfortable reality that Steam at this stage is kind of a monopoly, and these acts of contrition afforded to very specific, if vocal YouTube communities, all amount to how they can maintain that absolute control. But why is that bad, you ask? All my games are in one place, so obviously I want that platform to thrive for the sake of convenience. I don't want a million Uplays and Origins clogging up my desktop. I get that, I do. It's the age we live in, where we're constantly seeking out new ways to condense as far as possible the ways in which we consume media. The problem is that it gives Valve no real reason to improve. Game devs are making far less in sales, customer satisfaction is through the floor, but Gabe Newell's net worth is the highest it's ever been. Even if individual games are selling less, it's safe to say that Valve is making just as much money across a larger number of titles. Except now there's going to just be a ubiquitous paywall, I guess, locking out even genuine developers who might not have the money. It just doesn't work because there's no competition. The solution is not to congratulate Steam on the appearance of contrition, of their supposed catering to the specific whims of the audiences of two specific YouTubers. The solution is to perhaps forego some of that unity of experience for the sake of supporting other platforms offering different services. Whilst Uplay and Origin offer little in the way of unique selling points other than you get to launch this launcher from Steam which itself is a launcher, there are other similar but bespoke platforms that are well worth examining. For example, instead of trying to find that tiny indie diamond in the gargantuan pile of shoddy mobile ports that is Steam, why not look for that experience on somewhere like itch.io? It's a service curated by actual human beings, which offers small developers the means to distribute their unique, fun, and experimental experiences that they might not be able to get on Steam. It's so different from Steam that its founder Leif Corcoran has in the past altered things on the back end to accommodate for the quirks of specific games, for instance. This is a platform that really cares about a specific kind of experience. With Steam's upcoming paywall, you'll probably see a lot more devs of this kind gravitating to this service, with the human curation and a genuine wish to support genuine developers stopping your digital homicides in their tracks. You can support the work of these developers by supporting the platform that cares about them. It's the same with GOG, you go there for old games, many of which fall into that somewhat ephemeral middle tier of development that can't really exist now because anything other than AAA Megacorp or scrappy garage programmer just isn't sustainable on a platform like Steam. It's also totally DRM free, whereas Steam itself is DRM, with GOG giving you more choice in how you play and control your purchases. Those are just a couple of examples, but I'd say having multiple libraries is a small price to pay for each one having its own purpose, giving devs a choice of the platforms that best suit their interests, each service being able to foreground the best of its specialty as a result, leading to a better landscape for the consumer. It's supply and demand, you support these carefully curated experiences on each platform, and that curation suddenly becomes a lot easier and more effective as a result. More choice is better for everyone, and Valve controlling nearly 100% of all PC gaming purchases does not allow for that. Ultimately though, it's you who has to realise this, and perhaps consider sacrificing some convenience in favour of supporting a competitive marketplace. But hey, I guess John giving Valve a good talking to about algorithms will have to suffice for now. Which brings me on to my larger problem with self-confessed pro-consumer punditry, specifically on the business of the industry. And this is far from just about John and Jim. There's nuance to every situation in the games industry that I feel is often lacking in the way these people represent it. Everything is always about big bad publishers and lazy developers trying to make bad, incomplete experiences to irritate the poor, innocent consumer who can seemingly do no wrong, but apparently also just can't stop buying those dang bad games. Essentially, the customer isn't always right, and these commentators rarely, if ever, point that out. This is how you get to situations like the Mass Effect Andromeda thing, where people are shouting about lazy devs, when in order to get to their position, you have to be anything but. No one considers the fact that, well, games are hard to make, especially within a large company, so you talk to other devs and they'll tell you it's a miracle anything gets shipped in this industry. No one considers the fact that the devs perhaps didn't want to put the game out in that state. No one considers the fact that it was the end of the tax year, so EA weren't going to push that back further, instead forcing already pressured devs to work harder and release something that they perhaps wanted to work further on. But nope, a continuous reductive commentary on lazy devs, which itself is real lazy, and intentionally bad games, leads to people getting harassed by those who have no idea how complex this process can be, or in this case, who was even involved. These people are now going to be the explorers, choosing which games get surfaced and which get buried. All for the sake of Valve fixing their image problem. Sounds great, right? You just gotta have the good games be on Steam's front page and the bad games be catapulted into the sun. What I'm saying is that being pro-consumer means so much more than breaking things down into good games and bad games, something you see a lot of, especially in John's video. This is a problem for a number of reasons, not least of which because it doesn't allow for games in that sweet middle ground. The camp games, the ones that maybe lack some technical finesse but have heart. What's that? You want a kind of bad game to laugh at and have fun with? Well no, you don't get to do that because Jim and John's fans turned explorers have decided that the joke's over now and that these games are all bad. It's downright suppressive. Even if it's not that with these pro-consumer YouTubers though, things often come down to this PC port has a bad frame rate and these controls are bad and that's why this business hates the consumer. Don't get me wrong, I've been guilty of reductive statements myself in the past. I've just never claimed to be some pro-consumer advocate. But assure yourself of this, the idea that devs are lazy and want to hurt the consumer is not only reductive, it distracts from real, tangible problems about the way the game industry works. An example of this for me was back in November last year, when Ubisoft executives were accused of and fined for insider trading. Allegedly, these higher-ups, including the CEO of Ubisoft Montreal, sold stocks back in October 2013, right before substantial delays were announced for both Watch Dogs and The Crew. Delays which, according to PC Gamer, saw shares drop by around 25%. In December 2016, the people involved were fined a combined total of €1.27 million, although they asserted their innocence and plans to appeal. Now, not only is insider trading super illegal, but in games, this is the kind of business practice that has knock-on effects on company standing, project timelines, budgets, pressure on development teams, etc. Things that lead to less than ideal products. And yet, nothing. I found out about this from a news article buried on Gamespot, and no one was talking about it. That seemed wild to me. I guess it got a postscript in a Jimquisition episode in January, as if this was just a simple foible of the company, when potentially it was something much more serious. But no, because it didn't directly translate to this company hates the consumer because DLC or bad frame rates, you didn't see it covered. I mean, without wishing to get too conspiratorial, I'm willing to bet the executives at Ubisoft were kind of glad that people were continuing to comment on things as symptomatic of the larger problem as frame rates and pre-order DLC and the like, precisely because it distracted from that larger problem. That there's a distinction between the so-called shady business practices that amount to bad games and the actual shady business practices of which the things people complain about are a result. I mean, I could talk about the failings of this kind of punditry all day, but at some point the onus is just kind of on the consumer to make better choices. We live in a capitalist society. Big businesses do not have your interests at heart, and just because you loudly demand that catering to gamers makes business sense does not make it so. In fact, often the opposite is true. You can talk about effing Konami and how they're going to die without Kojima, and how they don't care about the gamers all you want, but their profits are actually up year on year. This kind of thing should be a given. It's the surface level. Challenge yourself to go deeper into the underlying problems when discussing this stuff. It's probably why a lot of this consumer advocacy stuff kind of falls flat with me. It's both pointing out the blindingly obvious whilst failing to get to the heart of any issue. Valve attempting to control 100% of the PC gaming market is bad for developers and consumers alike. And no amount of YouTubers flown out to talk about dumb algorithms and further crowdsourcing curation is going to change any of that. The reality is that the solution to the problem of Steam comes down to you, the consumer, giving up some of the convenience of having one library of games in one place, in service of seeking out and supporting different platforms offering more specialised experiences. In return, this is where you will see Valve and the PC gaming market in general really start to improve. So I hope you enjoyed my take on the whole Valve situation. If you did, why not subscribe to the channel, hit the little bell thingy, and check out the podcast in the description. If you really want to go the extra mile, however, please consider checking out the Patreon. You have no idea how much it means to me and how much it helps the running of the channel. Thank you so much to all the patrons on screen for their continued support. I'd also like to give special thanks to Biggie, Mark B. Writing, Peter, Nico Blakely, Artyom Vitsyuk, Justin's Holderness, Christian Koneman, James Doring, Thomas Coker, Nicholas Ross, and Charlie Yang. And with that, I'm Hamish Black, and this has been Writing on Games. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.